I was sprinting through a dark forest, my legs burning with every step begging me to stop. My chest heaved painfully, each breath sharp and ragged, but I couldn't stop, not with the terrifying noise echoing from behind. I didn't know what I was running from, only that something or someone was chasing me. The trees thickened, the shadows deepened, and before I knew it, I found myself trapped in a narrow, dark room. The walls were painted in a dark, unsettling red paint. When I reached out and touched the surface, the paint oozed into warm blood and started trickling down the walls and then pooled at my feet. A scream tore from my throat as panic surged through me. I jolted awake, gasping, sitting upright so fast I nearly collided with the twins' heads hovering nearby. Squinting against the harsh sunlight flooding the room, I groaned and stumbled to the window, pulling the curtain back to shut out the merciless light. Just as I closed the curtains and flopped back onto the bed, grateful for the darkness, a rustling sound made me open one eye. The twins had walked over to the window, their small hands grasping the edge of the curtain. With a swift tug, they pulled it open again, flooding the room with light. Seriously? I groaned, sitting up with a frustrated sigh. Can't we leave it closed for just 5 minutes? I swung my legs over the side of the bed and trudged back to the window, pulling the curtain shut again. I gave the twins a pointed look before heading back to the bed. But the moment I settled into the pillows, the sound of the curtains being dragged open filled the room once more. Really, do you two ever stop? I muttered, glaring at the twins. They stood by the window, grinning innocently as if they hadn't just undone my one attempt at peace. I sat upright, rubbing my temples as I glanced at the twins standing by the window. Seriously, can't you let your aunt rest for just 5 more minutes? I said, trying to sound stern, though the sight of their innocent grins softened my frustration. They nodded in unison, their little faces glowing with mischief. No. Mom told us to watch over you, and when you wake up, to tell you to get a fresh, warm shower and have something to eat. Avery, the more talkative of the two, explained. I groaned, raking my fingers through my hair with both hands, trying to shake off the remnants of my dream. Okay, now I get why I woke up with your little cute faces hovering over me, I said with a tired chuckle. But do you both mind telling me where your mother is? The twins exchanged a quick glance before answering simultaneously, but with different answers. No, Zoe said stubbornly, crossing her arms. She went to see Dad, Avery blurted out. I raised an eyebrow amused and turned to Avery. Thanks for the information, buddy. He beamed at the praise while her sister shot him a look of pure fury. That's called betrayal, Avery, she snapped, crossing her arms. We have to protect Mom. I chuckled softly, turning to her. I'm also your lovely Aunt Zoe. It's not a betrayal to let me know where your mom went. Zoe wasn't having it. With a huff, she stormed out of the room, her small feet stomping against the floor. Avery hesitated for a second before darting after her, calling out, Zoe, wait! I reached for my phone on the nightstand and quickly dialed Kora's number. After a few rings, her voice finally came through, slightly muffled. Keilah, give me a second. Why the hell do you keep on running after Ethan? I cut her off, my voice sharper than I intended. The line suddenly cut off, and I blinked at my phone, realizing Kora had actually hung up on me. A chuckle bubbled up from my chest, a mix of disbelief and irritation. Are you fucking serious? I muttered under my breath. I immediately called her back, but this time the line was busy. She was avoiding me. Typical. Rolling my eyes, I quickly typed a message. Let me hope you didn't forget that today is Auntie's death anniversary, so I humbly request you collect yourself and get back home this instant. I hit send and tossed the phone onto the bed before heading out of the bedroom and into the living room. As I approached, the sound of bickering reached my ears. The twins were at it again, their voices raised in a heated argument. Why would you tell her? Zoe whined, hands on her hips. Mom said it was to keep it a secret. Because it's not a big deal, Zoe. Avery shot back, crossing his arms defiantly. Aunt Keilah deserves to know. I stepped into the room, rubbing the back of my neck. All right, that's enough, I said, interrupting their squabble. They both froze and turned to face me, their little faces flushed with frustration. I sighed, softening my tone. I'm sorry, you two. It's because of me that you're fighting. Now that I've said sorry, how about you two make peace? They both exchanged hesitant glances, neither willing to be the first to give in. But after a moment, Avery held out his hand. Truce? Zoe glared at him, then sighed dramatically before shaking his hand. Truce. But next time, don't tell Aunt Keilah everything. I smiled and ruffled their hair. Thanks, you two. Now, how about we all get some breakfast while we wait for your mom to get back? The twins looked at me with identical expressions of amusement, as if I'd said something silly. Aunt Keilah, it's past breakfast already, Zoe informed me with a giggle. We had ours earlier. Avery chimed in. Yeah, we're going to the playroom now. I smiled and nodded at them. All right, enjoy your playtime. They grinned and dashed off. Once they were out of sight, I made my way into the kitchen, deciding it was time to make myself some breakfast, even if it was technically closer to lunch. I rummaged through the cabinets, settling on a simple meal of toast and scrambled eggs. As I sat down at the table with my plate and took a sip of the coffee I had brewed, my mind drifted without warning to Ralph. My chest tightened, and I felt an ache deep inside me, one I thought I had buried long ago. I stared down into my cup, my fingers absently tracing the rim. Why am I even thinking about him? I scolded myself as I shook my head to snap myself back. I had made a choice to leave behind that world, to distance myself from the constant pain and danger that being with Ralph entailed. And yet, no matter how far I ran, the shadows of the past clung to me, refusing to let go. I brought the cup of coffee to my mouth, desperate for a distraction, but as I took a sip, the scorching liquid burned my tongue. I jolted, hissing in pain as I set the cup down. Great, I thought. The sudden pain was enough to crack open the fragile walls I had built around myself, and for a brief moment, it was like the floodgates were ready to burst. But from the corner of my eye, I saw them, Zoe and Avery, peeking around the doorframe of the kitchen, curiously watching me. I sighed inwardly, knowing exactly who had put them up to it. Kora. She had undoubtedly told them to keep an eye on me whenever I was alone, ensuring I didn't fall apart in front of them. Swallowing the pain and biting back the sob that begged to escape, I stood up, grabbing the cup of coffee and pouring it into the sink. I added too much sugar, I said loudly enough for the twins to hear, forcing my voice to sound casual for them to leave. Without looking back, I opened the fridge and grabbed a glass of cold juice, sipping it slowly. I saw the twins leaving and I forced myself to eat everything on my plate, even though I felt numb. Once my plate was clean, I stood up and headed back to my bedroom, leaving the lingering heaviness behind me. In the bathroom, I stepped into the shower, letting the water cascade over me. The warmth soothed my tense muscles, and as the steam filled the small space, the tears I had been holding back finally came. Silent sobs racked my body, and I leaned against the cool tile, the water mingling with my tears as they washed away. When I finally felt a measure of relief, I turned off the shower, wrapped myself in a towel, and opened the door to head to my bedroom. But I froze, startled. When I saw the twins standing right outside the bathroom door, their small faces filled with concern. "What are you two doing?" I asked, my voice a little sharper than I intended. "This isn't good, you know." The twins exchanged a guilty look before Zoe spoke first, her voice soft. "Sorry, Aunt Keilah." Avery quickly added, "Mom told us to." I cut him off gently, shaking my head. I know your mom told you to watch over me, but listen, I'm a grown woman. I don't need to be watched by kids. I'm perfectly fine, okay?" They both stood there, quiet for a moment, avoiding my gaze. Then Avery, always the braver one, finally looked up at me, his eyes full of sadness. "But we know you're not fine, Aunt Keilah. We hear you cry every night in your bedroom." The confession hit me like a punch to the gut, my heart twisting at the thought of them hearing my pain. I crouched down to their level, forcing a smile onto my face despite the guilt swirling inside me. "Oh, you guys. Thank you for looking out for me and caring so much, but trust me, I'm fine." I hesitated, then added, "Whenever you hear me crying, it's not because I'm sad, it's just the movies I watch before bed, you know? Some of them are really emotional." They both stared at me, not entirely convinced, but too young to argue. I reached out, ruffling their hair softly. "So don't worry, okay? Go back and play." Zoe gave me one last uncertain look before nodding slowly. Avery hesitated but followed her lead, and together they turned and walked back toward their playroom. As they disappeared from view, I stood up, letting out a long breath. Sad movies, I thought bitterly. If only that were the truth. By the time I slipped into a pair of jeans and a soft sweater, I heard the twins' excited voices echoing from the living room. They were welcoming their mother back, their laughter and excited chatter filling the house. I grabbed my phone from the bed and quickly stuffed it into my bag, making sure I had everything I needed before heading out. But just as I reached the door, Kora appeared, blocking my exit, and pushed me back inside and closed the door behind her and leaned against it. "Keilah," she said breathlessly, her voice filled with an intensity that made my skin prickle. "You have to help me." I blinked, confused by the sudden rush, and frowned at her. "Help you? Kora, what's going on?" "Please, Keilah, I need you to find that vampire," she continued, her words tumbling out in a hurried mess. "You have to make him take away whatever spell he puts on Ethan. I can't stand it anymore. I need Ethan in the lives of his kids. I need him to look at me again, like he used to." I stared at her, stunned, my brain struggling to catch up with the flood of words pouring out of her. My mind whirled, trying to process her frantic request, and she looked deadly serious, her eyes wide and desperate. "Kora." I began slowly, choosing my words carefully. "What the hell has gotten into you?" I took a step closer, studying her face for any sign that this was some kind of cruel joke. "You remember I told you I don't know where he went, right? He disappeared without a trace. Not even Ralph knows where he went. He's just gone." But Kora was shaking her head even before I finished. "I don't care how long it takes. You have to find him. You're the only one who can." Her words hit me hard, and I took a deep breath, closing my eyes for a moment to compose myself. I could feel the weight of her desperation pressing down on me, but I also knew I couldn't give her the answer she wanted. There was no finding Damian. He had vanished as if he never existed, and I didn't have the energy to chase ghosts. "Kora, listen to me," I said softly, placing a hand on her arm. "We'll talk about this when I get back from Auntie's memorial, okay? Right now, I need to be there. You know how important today is." Kora nodded, her expression softening. "All right. We'll talk when you get back." She stepped aside and opened the door, giving me space to leave. I hesitated for a brief moment, glancing back at her one last time before walking past her and into the living room where the twins were waiting eagerly. I bent down with a smile as both of them planted a kiss on each of my cheek. "Tell Grandma we said hi," Avery said cheerfully. "Yeah, and that we miss her," Zoe added, her little face bright with sincerity. Kora chimed in from behind. "And please tell her that we love her. Tell her to forgive me that I couldn't visit her this time." I nodded at them, smiling despite the heaviness in my heart. "Of course. I'll make sure she knows." I slipped into my boots, tightened the laces, and headed out the door. I climbed into the taxi waiting for me and gave the driver a small nod, signaling that I was ready. The drive to our old residence, where my aunt's grave was, passed in silence. When the taxi pulled up, I stepped out, taking a long, steadying breath as I fought the tears that threatened to spill. The familiar ache in my chest grew as I walked up the small hill toward my aunt's grave. As I approached the gravestone, I noticed fresh roses lying on the ground. They looked as if they had been placed there just moments before. I frowned and glanced around, wondering who could have left them, but no one was in sight. With a sigh, I knelt down, placing my own roses beside the others. I ran my fingers over the stone, tracing the engraved letters of my aunt's name. For a moment, it felt like the whole world had gone silent, like even the trees and the breeze were holding their breath, waiting for me to speak. "Hi, Auntie," I whispered, my fingers tracing the cool surface of the gravestone. "It's me. How are you doing over there?" The words felt heavy on my lips, and I had to struggle to get them out. "I know it's been a while. Things have changed so much since you've been gone. I feel like I don't know how to keep up with everything, but I'm trying. I'm really trying." I paused, imagining her gentle voice urging me to ease up on myself. "I can almost hear you telling me not to be so hard on myself," I said softly, a shaky laugh escaping me. but it's hard without you, Auntie. I wish you were still here. But then I remind myself that you're with my little Evan, keeping him company and making sure he doesn't miss me too much. I broke down, my shoulders trembling as the thought of my little boy overwhelmed me. It tears me apart every day that I can't be with my baby anymore. I choked out, my voice cracking with emotion. I'm sure he misses me just as much as I miss him. I can't help but think he's angry with me, that he's avoiding me in my dreams because he thinks I'm a terrible mother. Which I am. What kind of mother doesn't visit her child? I sniffled, trying to calm myself as my head throbbed from the tears. I took a deep, shaky breath before continuing. Aunt, please tell my little Evan that I'm so sorry, that I miss him terribly. If he could come to me in a dream, even just for a brief moment, I'd be the happiest mother in the whole universe. I pressed my forehead against the cold stone, trying to steady my breathing. The silence around me felt heavy. I closed my eyes, imagining my aunt's comforting presence, and hoping that somehow, somewhere, my little Evan could feel my love reaching out to him. I kept my forehead pressed against the cold stone, letting out heavy sobs. But then a sudden wind swept through the cemetery, darkening the clouds above. I wiped my tears, trying to collect myself. Auntie, I think it's going to rain. I have to leave. Just as I finished speaking, the first heavy drops of rain began to fall. I glanced up at the sky, the raindrops growing more insistent. I'm off, Auntie, I said quickly, pulling out my phone to order a taxi. I turned to leave the cemetery, hurrying through the rain as it began to pour. The droplets pounded harder against me, soaking through my clothes. My steps quickened as I raced down the path toward the main road, but in my haste, I stumbled over an unseen obstacle and fell hard onto the ground. The impact jarred my body, sending me rolling roughly until I landed in the middle of the road. Pain surged through me, and I cried out as I lay there, battered and bruised. I pushed myself upright, my heart racing as I tried to move out of the road, but my legs wouldn't respond. I strained to move them, trying again and again, but they remained stubbornly immobile. Panic surged through me as I struggled, feeling as though my legs had been bound by invisible threads. Panic surged through me as I let out a piercing scream. Help! Please, someone help me! I called out, my voice trembling, but the only answer was the sound of the rain and my own desperate cries. Then, my eyes widened in terror as I saw a car approaching, its music blaring loudly. What chilled me even more was the driver's eyes, glowing with an unnatural light, locked onto me with a menacing focus. My breath came in ragged gasps as the car got closer. The car continued its relentless approach, and an intense, feverish heat surged through my body. My vision began to blur, the world darkening around the edges. I felt my strength waning, my body unable to move as the car's lights grew ever closer. My last thought, amidst the pain and terror, was that maybe, just maybe, I'd finally get to meet the people I missed. With that, everything around me faded to black. My body ached as I drifted in and out of consciousness, the soft beeping of machines echoing faintly in the background. I tried to open my eyes, but my eyelids felt heavy, weighed down by the fatigue that clung to me. Slowly, the sounds became clearer, a distant murmur of voices, the hum of machinery, and the distinct sound of footsteps. My skin felt as though it was on fire, especially around my neck. Instinctively, my hand shot up to scratch at the irritation, but my fingers grazed over a patch of plaster covering part of my neck where the irritation itch comes from. Confusion clouded my thoughts, the memory of how I ended up here slipping through my grasp. Before I could think any further, the hospital curtain divider swung open with a soft swish, revealing a nurse in a crisp uniform. She gave me a warm, professional smile as she stepped closer to my bedside. "Ah, you're awake, Miss Keilah," she said, her voice calm and soothing. "How are you feeling?" I blinked, trying to gather my scattered thoughts. I'm not sure," I murmured, my throat parched and rough. "What happened? How did I get here?" The nurse glanced at the clipboard in her hand before meeting my gaze. "The taxi you ordered found you lying unconscious in the middle of the road." The nurse's words barely registered as a new sensation surged through my body, a heat so intense it made me shiver. My skin prickled with it, starting from my toes and racing upward like a fire being kindled from within. It grew hotter and hotter until it centered around my neck where the plaster covered. I clamped a hand tightly over the patch, trying to contain the heat, but it only intensified. My breath quickened, the heat rushing like a flood, making my head spin. My heart pounded in my chest and confusion gripped me. Something wasn't right. The nurse noticed my distress and frowned, stepping closer. "Miss Keilah, are you all right? Should I call for the doctor?" I shook my head slightly, trying to focus. Why does my body heat up like this? And then the heat goes onto the side of my neck. I stopped abruptly, realization dawning like a lightning strike. My pulse raced faster than before, panic slowly crawling up my throat as I pieced it together. No, it couldn't be. The nurse opened her mouth to say something, but I cut her off, my voice a little shaky. "Excuse me, nurse, I need to use the restroom." Without waiting for a response, I swung my legs over the bed, ignoring the dizziness that hit me as I rushed through the crowded hallway. Nurses and patients blurred around me as I stumbled my way to the bathroom. I burst into the nearest bathroom and slammed the door behind me, leaning heavily against the sink. My reflection stared back at me in the mirror, pale and drenched in confusion. My breath came out in shallow gasps as I reached up, trembling fingers brushing against the edge of the plaster on my neck. With a sudden, swift motion, I ripped it off, my eyes widening as they took in what lay beneath. The mark. Damien's mark that had disappeared 4 years ago had returned, clear as day on my skin. I stared at the mark on my neck, disbelief gripping me. My reflection wavered in the dim lighting of the bathroom, but the mark was unmistakable. Damien's mark had reappeared after all these years as though it had never faded in the first place. My heart pounded so hard, it felt like it would break through my rib cage. This couldn't be happening. My fingers hovered over the mark, not quite daring to touch it, afraid that somehow it might respond, or worse, grow stronger. Memories of Damien flooded my mind, his piercing eyes, the way his presence had always both frightened and fascinated me. I had thought those days were over, but the reappearance of his mark could only mean one thing. He was back. But why? And how? Panic surged through me as I stumbled back from the mirror, pressing my back against the cold bathroom wall. My breath came in shallow, uneven gasps, and my thoughts spiraled wildly. Was this a warning? A threat? What did Damien want? No, I had left that world behind. I wanted no part of it anymore. I squeezed my eyes shut, forcing myself to calm down. There had to be a rational explanation for this. Maybe it wasn't Damien's doing at all. But even as the thought crossed my mind, I knew I was grasping at straws. This mark wasn't a coincidence. It never had been. I needed answers, but from whom? I couldn't reach out to Ralph. If Damien was back, it meant chaos was brewing, and Ralph's presence would only pull me deeper into a conflict I desperately wanted to avoid. He was the last person I could afford to see. But what now? I opened my eyes and stared back at my reflection, pale and unsettled. The mark seemed to pulse faintly under the dim light, a reminder that my past wasn't as far away as I had hoped. The fragile peace I had fought so hard for was on the verge of shattering, and I had no idea how to stop it. The door creaked open, and my heart seized with terror. I instinctively pressed myself against the cold tiles of the bathroom wall, fully expecting to see Damien's shadowy figure barging in, his eyes locked on me. But instead, a frail patient stepped in, looking even more ghostly than I did. Her gaze drifted over me, concern flickering in her tired eyes. "Are you okay?" she asked softly, her voice cracking with weakness. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to nod. Yeah, I muttered, though my voice didn't sound convincing even to myself. Without waiting for her response, I bolted from the bathroom, my legs trembling as I made my way back down the hallway toward my hospital bed. I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears, the weight of the mark on my neck throbbing as if it were alive. But as I neared my bed, my eyes landed on someone unexpectedly. Dahlia. I froze in place, my breath catching in my throat. She was standing there, close to my bed. Her gaze fixed on me the moment she noticed my presence, and panic surged through me again. "Keilah," she called my name softly, her tone laced with concern. I turned on my heel, instinctively wanting to flee, but my body betrayed me. My foot caught on the edge of the floor and I tripped, falling hard onto my hands with a gasp. Pain shot through my palms, and embarrassment flooded my chest as I heard gasps and murmurs from the people around. I could feel their eyes on me, watching. Heat rushed to my face. I wished the ground would swallow me whole. "Keilah!" Dahlia was already rushing over, crouching down to help me. Her hand reached out toward me, but I quickly pulled away, pushing myself to stand on my own. I didn't need her help, not now. Not when everything was falling apart. I took a few steps back, putting distance between us. "What are you doing here?" I demanded, my voice sharper than intended. "How did you find me?" Dahlia stood up slowly, her eyes never leaving mine. She looked worried, her brows furrowing as if she wanted to say 1,000 things at once. "We can't talk here," she whispered, glancing around as if she feared we were being watched. I froze for a moment, staring at Dahlia, the weight of her words sinking in. She stood there, waiting for me to respond, but I couldn't move. My mind was a battlefield, torn between the pull of familiarity and the overwhelming urge to run in the opposite direction. It's not like I hated Dahlia, no. She'd never done anything to hurt me directly, but she was part of Ralph's world, part of everything I was trying to escape. The mere thought of taking a step toward her felt like willingly stepping back into the life I'd fought so hard to leave behind. Ralph, the pack, the power struggles, I couldn't handle any of it. Not again. Not with Damien's mark reappearing, not with the storm of emotions raging inside me. I had to stay far away from anything and anyone connected to Ralph. "No," I whispered to myself, shaking my head to clear the thoughts. I looked Dahlia in the eyes and forced the words out. "There's nothing to talk about." My voice was cold, distant, though a part of me hated treating her this way. "I'm done. Whatever it is, just leave me out of it." I brushed past her without waiting for a response. My hands trembled as I grabbed my bag from the hospital bed, the weight of my decision pressing down on me. I started walking, forcing one foot in front of the other. Each step felt heavier, like I was dragging myself away from something inevitable. But then, the room spun. The dizziness hit me so fast, I barely had time to react. My vision blurred, and I stumbled backward, and my legs buckling beneath me. Before I hit the ground, Dahlia was there. She caught me, her arms firm but gentle, holding me steady before I could collapse. Her concerned eyes searched my face, and she asked softly, "Are you okay, Keilah?" I closed my eyes for a brief moment, trying to steady myself. I felt a cool breeze, or maybe it was the coldness of reality settling back in. When I opened them again, the dizziness had subsided. I pulled away from Dahlia, avoiding her gaze, trying to regain control of myself. "Please, Dahlia," I whispered, my voice softer this time, but filled with desperation. "Next time you see me, just pretend you don't know me, and don't follow me. I'm begging you." Her face faltered, but I didn't wait for her to answer. I couldn't handle the pity or concern in her eyes. I needed to get away before I broke down completely. Without another word, I rushed out of the hospital, my heart pounding in my chest. The moment I stepped outside, the heavy, cold night air hit me like a wave. I hurried to the line of taxis parked near the hospital entrance and slid into the back seat of the first one I could find. "Where to?" the driver asked. I gave him my address, my voice barely above a whisper. As the car pulled away from the hospital, I rested my head against the window, staring out at the blur of buildings passing by. My mind raced, but one thing was clear. Dahlia, Ralph, Damian, none of them could be part of my life anymore. As the taxi sped down the road, a sudden sharp throb pulsed in my neck again. It wasn't just a dull ache this time, it was as if fire coursed beneath my skin. I hissed in pain, my hand flying up to touch the mark. "Why the hell are you back?" I muttered through clenched teeth, my voice shaking with anger and frustration. "I don't want you here, so get back to wherever you've been hiding and leave me the hell alone." I scratched at the mark, harder and harder, desperate to make it stop. My fingers dug into my skin, feeling the heat of it, and tears blurred my vision as they streamed down my face. The pain wasn't just physical anymore, it was like every emotion I had buried was clawing its way to the surface. The driver glanced at me through the rearview mirror. "Are you all right, young lady?" I ignored him, too lost in my spiraling thoughts to respond. My fingers continued to scratch at my neck, as if I could somehow erase the mark, erase the memories, erase him. The tears wouldn't stop, and neither would the flood of memories crashing through my mind. The pack, the council, Ralph, the constant fear. And then, in the midst of all that pain, a small, bright memory broke through. My son. His sweet, innocent smile. I could almost hear his laughter, see his tiny fingers reaching for me. A faint, broken smile tugged at my lips, but just as quickly as the joy came, it vanished. The memory of his lifeless body in my arms slammed into me like a physical blow, shattering any fragile sense of peace I had found. I gasped, unable to breathe as the grief overwhelmed me, sending me spiraling into a frenzy of pain and despair. My chest tightened. I couldn't draw in enough air. It felt like I was suffocating, my lungs unable to catch up with the storm inside my mind. I clawed at my throat, desperate for air, but nothing helped. My vision blurred and panic took over as I gulped, struggling to breathe. The driver's panicked voice pierced the haze. "I'm taking you back to the hospital." The car swerved as he turned sharply, but I shook my head, my voice barely a whisper as I forced the words out. "Stop. Please, just stop for a moment." He hesitated, but pulled over to the side of the road. I fumbled with the door handle, my hands trembling, and stumbled out, nearly falling as I flopped onto the ground, gasping for air. My hands braced against the cold pavement, and I gulped in deep breaths, trying to cool down the frantic beating of my heart. I pressed my forehead to the ground, pressed my palms against the earth, desperate for something solid to ground me, to stop the whirlwind of emotions tearing me apart. "Are you okay?" The driver called from behind, his voice tinged with concern. I didn't answer. I couldn't. All I could do was try to calm my racing mind, to hold myself together before I shattered completely. The driver called out again, his voice more urgent this time. "Get back in the taxi, miss. This place isn't safe at this hour." I wiped the remaining tears from my cheeks and nodded, still feeling shaky, but I obliged, climbing back into the taxi. My body felt drained, like a puppet whose strings had been cut. "Take me to my address," I mumbled, barely loud enough for him to hear. He glanced at me through the rearview mirror, frowning. "Are you sure you're all right? You don't look it. I'm guessing you ran off from that hospital without being discharged." "I'm fine now," I lied, trying to sound more convincing than I felt. My throat was raw, my mind racing in 1,000 directions. I needed to be anywhere but there. Away from the hospital, away from whatever was happening to me. The driver hesitated for a moment, still unconvinced, but finally sighed and turned the car around, heading toward my home. By the time we arrived, dawn was just starting to break, soft light creeping over the horizon. I paid the fare, thanked him, and hopped out, feeling a strange sense of relief to be back. As I entered the living room, I saw Kora lying on the couch, her phone clutched loosely in her hand. It looked like she had waited up for me all night. A pang of guilt hit me as I sauntered over and gently grabbed the blanket from the back of the couch and gently draped it over her. She stirred slightly but didn't wake up. I stood there for a moment, watching her breathe before turning and heading into the kitchen. I sat down at the small table, pulling my knees up to my chest as I stared out the window. The sky outside was painted with soft pinks and purples, but I barely noticed. My mind was a storm, filled with every agonizing detail of what had just happened. How had Dahlia gotten to me so quickly? She wasn't just passing by. Could it have been because I was near the perimeters of my old home? But was it a coincidence or something more? The thought unsettled me, but my mind didn't stop there. It drifted back to the man in the car, the one who had aimed it straight at me. His glowing eyes haunted my mind, sending a shiver down my spine. I couldn't shake the image. The way he looked at me, it wasn't human. It was like he was possessed or something far worse. But what had really happened? How had I not been run over? I could still feel the air rush as the car had sped toward me, certain that I was about to be crushed beneath its wheels. Yet here I was, alive. I hugged my legs tighter, resting my chin on my knees. Nothing made sense. Every time I thought I had escaped that world, something pulled me back, dragging me deeper into the chaos I'd tried so hard to leave behind. The sun crept over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, but I remained coiled up on the small kitchen chair, lost in my thoughts. The warmth of the light couldn't reach me. It felt distant, like I was trapped in a shadow that refused to let go. My arms were still wrapped tightly around my legs, chin resting on my knees, when I heard a soft voice call out, "Aunt Keilah." I turned around as if waking from a deep, troubled dream. Avery stood there, his small face framed by tousled hair, his eyes wide and curious. I managed a weak smile, feeling a pang of guilt for the state I was in. "Yes, sweetie, good morning," I replied, my voice hoarse. Avery stared at me with an expression that suggested he didn't quite recognize me. As I tried to stand, pain shot through my leg. I yelped and dropped back into the chair, clutching at my calf as the sharp cramp held me in place. Footsteps sounded behind Avery, and I heard Kora stirring awake from the couch. Her voice was groggy, half asleep as she mumbled, "Yes, what is it?" When she stepped into the kitchen, she stopped abruptly, gasping in shock as her eyes landed on me. "Holy fuck! What happened to you?" The words tumbled out of her mouth before she could stop them. I winced, glancing at Avery. "Kora, stop cursing around the kids." Kora snapped her head toward her son, guilt flashing across her face. She quickly bent down, planting a soft kiss on his forehead. "You didn't hear that, okay?" she said, trying to smooth over the moment. Avery nodded obediently, though his eyes lingered on me for a second longer before Kora gently ushered him out of the room. "Go wake your sister for school, sweetheart." As soon as he ran off down the hallway, Kora's entire demeanor changed. She turned back to me, walking over and sitting across the table, her eyes filled with concern. Before she could ask the million questions I knew were brewing in her mind, I sighed and gave her the answer she feared. I ran into Dahlia. Her gasp was instant, and the worry etched deeper into her face. "Keilah," she whispered, her voice filled with shock. I looked away, staring out the window again. "I don't even know how she found me so quickly," I muttered. But there she was, like she'd been waiting for me. It's like I can't escape. Kora's eyes narrowed with concern as she took in my response. "Do you think Ralph sent her? Do you think he knew you would be coming to visit Auntie and sent Dahlia to find you?" I took a moment to consider her question. The thought of Ralph orchestrating this felt absurd, given the distance that had grown between us over the past 2 years. "No," I finally said, shaking my head. "I don't think so. Ralph and I broke up 2 years ago, and we haven't spoken since. We haven't even talked on the phone. If anything, that would mean he's moved on. There's no reason for him to send Dahlia." "What would be the point?" Kora studied me closely, her gaze steady. "Yes, you two broke up, but you're still mates. There's a connection there that might not just disappear because you're not together anymore. If Dahlia's back, there might be more to it than just coincidence." The silence in the kitchen felt suffocating. I sat there, my hands still in Kora's, but my mind was far away. When she spoke, her words barely registered until I felt the gentle squeeze of her fingers. "Go clean up and get some rest," she said softly, her tone gentle. "We'll talk more about this after I drop the twins off at school." I nodded, not trusting my voice. Everything inside me felt tangled, knotted with questions I couldn't answer. Kora gave me one last look before disappearing out of the kitchen. My body moved on autopilot, dragging me to my bedroom and then to the bathroom. The hot water would help, I told myself. It had to. I stripped off my clothes, but as I caught my reflection in the mirror, my gaze locked onto the mark. Damien's mark. It was faint before, almost like a distant memory, but now it was visible again, tingling with a strange, persistent itch. My hand hovered over it, my fingertips grazing the skin. A shudder passed through me, and suddenly my mind flashed back to the cave at Crimson Hills, where I'd first felt this same sensation. Could it have saved me? Could the mark have sensed the danger I was in? Did it protect me from getting ran over? Could Damian be nearby, watching? I shook my head. It didn't make sense. But then why was the mark itching like this? Why did I feel like I wasn't alone? I turned off the water, the sound of the spray cutting out suddenly, leaving an eerie silence behind. I have to confirm it, I whispered to myself, the thought slipping into my mind as easily as a breath. I dressed quickly, pulling on sweatpants and an old sweatshirt. My phone. I needed to text Kora, let her know I was stepping out. I rummaged through my bag, but it wasn't there. I dumped everything onto the bed, searching frantically. Nothing. Did I drop it at the hospital? Damn it. With a frustrated sigh, I grabbed a notepad from the drawer and scribbled a quick message for Kora, telling her I'd gone out. I wasn't going to wait around for answers. I needed to know if what I suspected was true. The streets felt too quiet as I walked. My steps were quick, determined, but as I got closer to where I was heading, that determination wavered. The familiar sense of danger prickled at my skin. This part of town wasn't safe, I knew that. The thugs who hung around here were trouble, the kind of trouble that normal people avoided. But I wasn't here to avoid them. I hesitated at the edge of the alley, my heart pounding in my chest. This was stupid, reckless, but I had to know, I had to be sure. I bent down and picked up a stone from the ground, big enough to cause real harm. My hand shook as I gripped it, my mind screaming at me to turn back, but I ignored it. I aimed at one of the men standing near the wall, his back turned to me, and with a swift motion, I threw it. The stone hit him square in the head, drawing out blood, and my heart nearly stopped. For a split second, nothing happened. Then, the man turned slowly, his hand reaching up to touch the spot where the stone had hit. His glowing eyes locked onto me, and a wave of dread washed over me. I stood frozen, my heart racing so fast I thought it might burst. The others around him noticed me too, their attention shifting, and I could feel their eyes boring into me. I swallowed hard, my throat dry as sand. What had I done? But I didn't move. I couldn't. I needed to see. I needed to know if the mark would flare again, if Damian would show up like in the cave. I stood my ground even as fear clawed at my insides, and waited for whatever was about to happen next. The man straightened, towering over the others around him, his movements deliberate, slow, like a predator sizing up his prey. His glowing eyes locked onto mine, and a deep growl rumbled from his throat, echoing off the alley walls. The others, 7 or even more of them, turned to face me as well, their gazes as cold and merciless as his. Panic seized my chest, but I didn't back down. My legs felt like lead, trembling, but I stayed rooted to the spot. The stone had barely fazed him, only seemed to amuse the others. One of them, a tall man with a scar running down the side of his face, stepped forward, his lips curling into a sinister grin. "You've got some nerve," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Throwing rocks at us? Little girl like you should know better." I clenched my fists as trying to keep the fear from swallowing me whole. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure they could hear it. But I wasn't here to run. I was here for answers. So bring it on. The man's grin widened at my silence, and his eyes glinted with dark amusement as he took another step forward. He looked like a cat playing with a mouse toying with me. "What are you going to do about it, huh?" My voice came out steadier than I felt. "Hit me too?" The scarred man's grin widened, his amusement shifting into something darker, more dangerous. He took another step closer, towering over me like a shadow that blocked out the fading light of the alley. "Little girl," he spat, his voice dripping with condescension. "Did you wake up on the wrong side of the bed? Or are you just begging for an ass-kicking today?" I stared up at him, my heart racing, but my eyes stayed locked on his. I could see the smug satisfaction in his expression, the way he thought I was scared out of my mind. But I wasn't going to give him that satisfaction. "Death wish, please," I scoffed, rolling my eyes. "You're all just a bunch of cowards, standing around like sheep waiting for someone else to tell you what to do. Or are you too scared to hit me without permission from your boss?" The smirk faltered on his face, just for a split second. I saw it, the flicker of irritation. "Good. You got a lot of mouth for someone who's clearly out of their depth," another thug called out from behind him, his voice gruff and full of mockery. He started toward me, but the scarred man held out his hand, stopping him in his tracks. No, no, the scarred man said slowly, his eyes narrowing in on me. Let's hear what the little brat has to say. She seems to think she's untouchable. Untouchable? You think I'm scared of you? I tilted my head and gave them a withering look. You're nothing but a bunch of overgrown bullies who get off on intimidating people who are weaker than you. Pathetic. But I guess that's what happens when you don't have the brains to do anything else with your lives. Am I supposed to be impressed? You can throw a punch. Congratulations. The alley grew tense, their gazes hardening as my words sank in. The scarred man's grin vanished, replaced by a look of cold fury. He stepped closer, his hand twitching at his side, as though resisting the urge to strike me down where I stood. You're walking on thin ice, girl, he hissed through clenched teeth. His hand shot out so fast I barely had time to react, smacking the air just inches from my face in a move meant to scare me. But I didn't flinch, not this time. I glared at him, meeting his furious gaze head-on. Go ahead, I said, my voice dripping with challenge. Do it. Hit me. I dare you. Is that all you're good for, smacking around someone smaller than you? Must be tough, huh? I'm sure your mom's really proud. The guy clenched his jaw so tightly I could practically hear his teeth grinding, his fists balled as if he were battling some inner demon just to keep from hitting me. But I didn't want him to win that battle. I didn't want him to hold back. I came for a beating, not out of desperation, but to confirm what I already suspected. I needed to know if the mark would shield me. But before he could decide, a voice rumbled from behind him. Step back. The guy's eyes widened, and without hesitation he obeyed, retreating like a scolded dog. My gaze shifted past him, landing on a man who stood at the far end of the building entrance. He was a man who made the others look like children. He was broader, taller, and more dangerous. A leader, judging by the way the others instantly deferred to him. This was it. I tugged on a mocking smile, certain that he would do the job for me, that this was the one who would give me the beating I came for. But instead of the violent reaction I expected, he shut me down with a calm, almost patronizing tone. Listen, woman, I know what you're trying to do here, but we don't hit women, so collect yourself and disappear from this zone. His calm, measured tone was like a bucket of cold water thrown on my hopes. I blinked, stunned by his response. That wasn't how this was supposed to go. He was supposed to lose it, to hit me, to give me what I came here for. I felt a surge of frustration rise up inside me. You're joking, right? I scoffed, taking a step forward, daring him. You don't hit women? Is that supposed to make you better than the rest of them? I glanced at the others with disdain. You're all the same, hiding behind your little code of honor, thinking it makes you noble. But you're nothing but a bunch of weak, spineless thugs. Can't even throw a punch when you're challenged. Pathetic. A muscle twitched in his jaw, but he didn't move. The thug's eyes darkened as he started marching toward me, his heavy steps echoing in the alley. My heart pounded in my chest, but I tugged on a smile, a twisted sense of satisfaction curling in my stomach. Yes, make it happen. I closed my eyes as he drew nearer, bracing myself for the blow. I could almost feel the impact, the magic I was waiting for, ready to burst through my skin, to remind me why I was here. But instead of a punch or slap, I felt rough hands clutch my sweatshirt. My eyes flew open in confusion just as the guy lifted me clean off the ground. My body dangled from his grasp, the rough fabric of my sweatshirt bunching around my neck as he strode toward the edge of their territory. And then, just as easily as he had picked me up, he set me down on the other side of their zone. Get moving, he ordered, his voice cold and final. Without another word, he turned his back to me and walked away back to his men. I stood there for a moment, dumbfounded, before letting out a long, resigned sigh. So much for that plan. My shoulders slumped as I leisurely began walking back, already plotting my next move. I needed a different approach, something to get what I wanted, to get under their skin. Maybe a car caught my eye, cruising down the street. For a brief, reckless moment, the thought of throwing myself in front of it flashed through my mind. Maybe that would do it. Maybe that would make someone finally react. But I shot the idea down just as quickly. too deadly, and besides, I wasn't sure if it was the mark that had protected me from that possessed, glowy-eyed man, or if I'd just gotten lucky. As I crossed the boundary of the thug's zone, stepping onto neutral ground, a hand suddenly clasped my wrist. I spun around startled to find another thug grinning at me. "There's some business you've got to finish," he said, his voice dripping with malice. Before I could respond, he hoisted me up over his shoulder like I was a sack of potatoes, carrying me back into their territory. My mind raced, panic starting to bubble up. This wasn't part of the plan. I tried to struggle, but his grip was ironclad. He carried me into one of the run-down buildings, pushing through a door where I was greeted by the sight of the guy I had insulted earlier. The one who'd retreated when their boss stepped in. When the thug finally set me down, I barely had time to find my footing before the man from earlier barreled toward me. His hand moved so fast that I barely saw it coming. The slap landed hard across my face, a sharp, burning pain spreading instantly across my skin. My vision blurred as I staggered back, blood trickling from my lips. My head rang, and for a moment, everything was spinning. The thug stood over me, his lip curling into a cruel smile. "Let me tell you something about myself, little girl. I'm not like my boss. I do hit women, and if you're unlucky enough, I'll kill him too." I blinked up at him, dazed as his words sank in. Fear started to creep up my spine, cold and suffocating. The mark didn't shield me. The reality of the situation hit me like a brick wall. I had wanted a beating, but this was more than I had bargained for. "You wanted a beating so badly?" he taunted, his voice low and menacing. "Well, you're gonna get it." Before I could react, his boot connected with my stomach in a vicious kick, and the force of it sent me flying across the room. My back slammed into the wall with a sickening thud, the pain radiating through my body as I crumpled to the ground. I gasped for breath, my vision swimming as the fear settled deep in my chest. What the hell have I gotten myself into? The thug grinned at the two other men in the room, and with a nod, they closed in on either side of him, sharing the same vile smirk. The air in the room grew thick with menace as they followed his lead. Then he turned his gaze back to me, his hand already tugging at his belt, slipping it from the loops of his pants with a menacing swish, and a new wave of panic crashed into me. I knew exactly what that bastard was up to. "Yes," he said, his voice low and malicious. "Exactly what you're thinking. Why don't me and my boys have a little fun before you get the proper beating you wanted?" My mind screamed at me to move, to get up and fight back, but my body betrayed me. My legs were numb, heavy with pain, and I couldn't summon the strength to stand. I tried to push myself up, but I collapsed back onto the cold floor, my entire body aching from the earlier beating. He unzipped his pants as he walked over to me, kneeling down to force my legs apart. I clenched my teeth, trying to use what little strength I had left in my legs to kick him off, but it was useless. My body was failing me, and the sickening feeling of helplessness gnawed at my core. He slapped me again, harder this time, the impact snapping my head to the side as pain exploded across my cheek. His hand closed around my throat, choking the air from my lungs. "You wanted this so badly, bitch?" he growled, his face inches from mine. "Now behave yourself and take it." I gasped for breath, my vision going dark as his grip tightened. When he finally released me, I coughed, my throat burning, desperate for air. He grinned wickedly, his fingers at the edges of my pants, tugging them down. But before he could go any further, before he could finish what he'd started, his body was suddenly yanked off me. 1 second he was looming over me, and the next he was flying across the room so violently that when he collided with the wall, it cracked under the force. The suddenness of it left me dazed. My fingers trembled as I scrambled to pull my pants back up, my mind still reeling. When I looked up, the two other men were already down, lying motionless on the floor like discarded dolls. The last guy standing was slammed down next, collapsing like a potato sack, his body limp. I blinked, trying to make sense of what had just happened. And then, when the figure who had saved me turned around, my breath caught in my throat. It was him, Damian. His presence filled the room like a storm, dark and unforgiving. My heart skipped a beat as he approached, his expression dark, his eyes glowing red. Is it in your DNA to attract trouble you cannot win? His voice was low, controlled, but there was an edge to it that sent a shiver down my spine. I froze in place as he knelt beside me. He didn't ask if I was okay. Didn't even offer a comforting word. He simply reached down, scooping me up into his arms as if I weighed nothing. Then, in the blink of an eye, everything around us blurred. The world rushed past in a whirlwind as we moved through the air, faster than I could comprehend, as if the wind itself carried us. Finally, we stopped in part of the forest. Damian landed me gently on the ground, but my mind was still reeling, buzzing too much to make sense of what had just happened. The world felt like it was spinning, and my body gave out before I could gather my strength. I crumpled down to my knees, my breath uneven, my limbs trembling. By the time Damian reached out to help me, I was already down, and for a second, I couldn't move. Damian reached out his hand to pull me up, but before he could touch me, I snapped. "I'm fine," I said, my voice sharp, more out of panic than anything else. My hand shot up in front of me like a barrier. "Please, just move back." I needed space. Space to breathe, to think, to feel something other than the terror still racing through my veins. He stopped, his red eyes locking onto mine with a look I couldn't quite read. His face was wild, almost unrecognizable, with overgrown hair and a thick beard that made him look like he had been living in the wilderness for months. "I mean it. Put some distance between us," I added, my voice quieter, more pleading than commanding this time. Damian took a step back, then another. The tension between us thickened as he finally gave me what I asked for, but it didn't matter. I still couldn't breathe right. "What the hell were you doing in a place like that?" he asked, voice low but edged with frustration. I ignored him as I tried to pull myself up. My body felt like it had been shattered and hastily put back together, legs weak, arms shaky, everything aching. I gripped the rough bark of the tree, using it to steady myself, the cold biting into my skin but grounding me. It wasn't enough to stop the storm building inside me, though. No, this wasn't about what just happened. It was about so much more. I shot him a look, anger bubbling to the surface. "No," I said, my voice trembling with fury. "It's me who has questions." His brows furrowed in confusion, but I didn't give him a chance to interrupt. "What the fuck did you do this to me?" The words rushed out of me, sharp like knives, the question that had been festering for so long finally spilling out. He stared at me, silent. "Why did your mark return after all this time?" I demanded, louder this time, my voice cracking slightly at the end. My heart was pounding with anger. Damian's eyes darkened, the red glow in his irises dimmed, but the intensity didn't leave. He was thinking, calculating, trying to find the right words. "Answer me," I spat out, my grip on the tree tightening. My body was shaking, from pain, from fear, from the weight of everything. I want to know why. Why, after all these years, after everything, I am still bound to you? Damian raked his hand through his thick, unruly hair, looking like he wanted to tear at it. His silence was deafening, the pause stretching out so long I thought he wasn't going to answer me at all. But then, finally, he spoke, his voice low, almost as if he was talking more to himself than to me. "I think it happened because of the dark magic that was sent toward you." I blinked, confusion mixing with the simmering anger inside me. Dark magic? What was he talking about? I stepped forward despite the trembling in my legs, despite the exhaustion weighing me down. "What do you mean, dark magic? Are you saying someone—" My voice cracked and I swallowed hard before continuing. "Someone tried to curse me?" His gaze snapped back to mine, something darker and heavier than guilt reflected in his eyes. "Yes." He took a breath, clearly reluctant to say more. "The person after you is powerful, Keilah. The kind of power that lingers in the air, that warps the bond between us." "What kind of bond are you even talking about?" I snapped, the frustration bubbling up in my chest. "We're not mates, Damian. There's no bond between us. You're a vampire, not a werewolf, so what the hell do you mean by bond?" the word tasted bitter in my mouth. Bond. As if we were somehow tethered together. Like fate had decided to weave our lives into a tangled mess I couldn't escape. It made no sense, and I wasn't about to pretend it did. Damien's expression didn't change, but I saw the flicker of something behind his eyes. Regret, maybe? Or frustration. Whatever it was, it didn't make me feel any better. The bond has nothing to do with being mates, he said slowly, like he was trying to make me understand something I clearly wasn't getting. This isn't about werewolf instincts or mate rituals, it's something different. Different how? I challenged, folding my arms as I glared at him. Because right now, it sounds like you're just making up excuses. He raked his hand through his hair again, clearly agitated. It's not an excuse, Keilah. The bond was created the moment I marked you when I bit you. That bite tied us together in ways I didn't fully understand at the time. Marked me, I repeated, the words feeling like ice down my spine. That was years ago, Damien. The mark faded. You disappeared. It was over. I thought it was too, he muttered, shaking his head. But apparently the magic, this dark magic, is using that mark to reawaken the connection. Whether you believe it or not, it's real. I took a step back, feeling the weight of his words settle over me. So what? You're saying I'm cursed because of you? No, he said, his voice sharp. You're not cursed because of me. You're cursed because someone is targeting you, and they're using our connection to do it. The frustration in his voice mirrored mine, but it didn't make it easier to swallow. I couldn't wrap my head around it. A bond? Between a vampire and me? This wasn't how it was supposed to work. I let out a long sigh, trying to make sense of what he was saying. All right, I get it, I said. Though the truth was, I didn't. Not even close. My mind was spinning, and every word that left his mouth felt like it was dragging me deeper into a mess I hadn't asked for. Just, can you tell me who this person is? The one so desperate to drag me back into a world I left behind a long time ago? It's the Werewolf Council's witch, he said, his voice low, almost as if he didn't want the words to linger in the air any longer than necessary. I blinked, my mind racing to keep up with this news. The Council's witch? I repeated, disbelief coating every word. Why would the Council's witch want anything to do with me? I took a shaky breath, still trying to make sense of everything. How am I supposed to believe you? I asked, my voice hard, though uncertainty was creeping in. For all I know, you're just making this up. I don't even know who this council witch is. For the time I spent with Ralph, I've never seen her before. And you're not even from the Moonrise Pack to know anything about the council. Why should I trust a word you say? Damien's eyes flickered with impatience, and before I could go on, he cut me off. I'm not here to make you believe me, Keilah, he said, his voice sharp and controlled. I don't care if you do or not, just stay out of trouble because this is the last time I'll ever interfere in your business. His words hit me like a slap, but I refused to let it show. This was exactly what I wanted, wasn't it? To never see him again? I forced myself to stay composed, biting back the angry retort I wanted to throw in his face. Instead, I straightened up. Exactly what I want, I said coldly, meeting his gaze. It's not like I missed you or wanted to see you. I just wanted to see if your reappeared mark would protect me somehow, but it proved me wrong. Now you can get back to wherever you lost yourself to. Damien's expression darkened. He stared at me for a long, intense moment, as if he was weighing his next words carefully. Finally, he replied, his voice dripping with finality. Very good, then. I hope we never see each other again. I forced myself to nod, my chest tightening at the thought of those words becoming true. Yes, I whispered. But before you go, I want one thing from you. In fact, two things. He paused, his eyes narrowing slightly, waiting for me to continue. First, I said, my voice steady, I want you to erase your bite mark off my skin permanently. And I want no trace left. And second, take the spell you cast on my friend's husband. I hate seeing her go mad, trying to get him back in his right mind, for their kid's sake. Will you do it, Mr. Damien? His gaze shifted, something unreadable flickering behind those now blue eyes of his. I can fulfill your second request, he said after a beat, but your first one. I can't. I narrowed my eyes on him. Why not? I demanded, my voice sharp. Why can't you get rid of it? Damien stepped closer, just enough for me to feel the dark intensity rolling off him in waves. Because that mark isn't just a physical bite, Keilah. It's tied to the bond we share, whether you like it or not. Erasing it isn't as simple as you think. I scoffed, shaking my head. That's not good enough. It's the truth, he replied coolly. I've already told you more than I should have. If I could break the bond, I would. But it's not within my power. I clenched my fists, frustration tearing through me. So what? I'm just stuck with it? For now, he said, his voice quiet but firm. But the bond doesn't have to mean anything. You're free to live your life as you wish. I won't interfere again. His words felt like a final goodbye, but they offered no comfort. I wanted to scream, to rage at the injustice of it all. Instead, I took a deep breath, swallowing down the bitter taste of defeat. Fine, I said, my voice low, refusing to meet his gaze. Just fix my friend's husband. That's all I ask. Damien gave me a long, lingering look before nodding. Consider it done. Hold on to me. I blinked, taken aback. What? I need to take you back to your place, he said, already stepping closer. I frowned, suspicion creeping back in. And how do you know where I live? But before I could demand an answer, he scooped me up without another word, lifting me into the air effortlessly. A whooshing sound filled the air as we were propelled forward at a speed that made my stomach churn. The rush of wind hit me like a wall, fierce and overwhelming. My chest tightened as the air forced its way into my lungs, suffocating me. I buried my face into his chest, trying to shield myself from the relentless pressure of the wind. The world around us blurred, and I felt like I was being tossed around in a hurricane. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, the motion stopped. I gasped, feeling solid ground beneath me again. We were no longer outside. We were standing in the middle of my living room. A piercing scream rang out, startling me. My head snapped up to see Kora, who had been sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone. She screamed so loudly that it echoed off the walls. "Kora!" I shouted, trying to calm her down. She stopped screaming, eyes wide as she looked at me, and then her gaze shifted to Damian. Her hand flew to her mouth, muffling a gasp. "Oh my, it's the vampire," she whispered in disbelief. "You found him." Kora shot off the couch and rushed over to me, her arms wrapping around me in a tight hug. "Thank you, girlfriend," she exclaimed, pulling away slightly to look at me with shining eyes. "You found him for me." Before I could even process her words, she turned to Damian, her eyes wide with wonder. "Where did you find him?" she asked, looking between the two of us like she couldn't believe what she was seeing. I opened my mouth to respond, but the truth of the situation tangled in my throat. What could I even say? That I didn't find him? That he found me? That his reappearance had nothing to do with Kora's problem? But before I could say anything, Damian's voice sliced through the silence, calm and controlled. "Do you know where your husband is?" Kora nodded quickly, her hands trembling as she clasped them together. "You mean, you're going to fix him?" Her voice wavered, thick with emotion. "Will he recognize me? And the kids?" The raw hope in her words tugged at my heart. "That's why I'm here," Damien replied. Tears welled up in Kora's eyes, and she let out a soft, shaky laugh. Overcome with gratitude, she stepped forward, arms outstretched as if to hug Damien. But just before she reached him, Damien gently pressed his hand to her head, halting her movement. Without a word, he spun her toward me. As soon as Kora pulled away from the hug, I asked, "How are you going to get Ethan here?" A smirk tugged at the corners of her lips. "You don't have to worry about that, sweetheart. Just wait and see." With that, she grabbed her phone and purse, hurrying toward the door. But just before stepping out, she turned back, her eyes twinkling with a mix of excitement and mischief. "Hold on to him, okay? Don't lose him before I come back." I rolled my eyes, managing a small smile. He's not going anywhere, Kora. She gave me a wink and rushed out, leaving a thick silence in the air. As soon as the door closed, I let out a long breath, the tension draining from my body. I turned to Damian and whispered, "Thank you," before sinking down onto the couch, my hand instinctively clutching my stomach. The ache from the kick I'd gotten earlier was flaring up, and I winced, trying to breathe through the pain. Damian's piercing gaze never left me, watching every movement with a stoic expression. I glanced up at him and managed to ask, "Aren't you going to sit?" After a moment, he lowered himself onto the couch, which seemed comically small beneath his tall, imposing frame. For a while, we just stared at each other, neither of us speaking. There was something unreadable in his eyes, a darkness that made my skin tingle with unease. Finally, he broke the silence. "Why are you looking at me like that?" I hesitated before asking, "Were you living in the wild or something? When did you last shave?" His lips twitched slightly, though his expression remained guarded. "Do I scare you?" he asked, his voice low and serious. I swallowed, unsure if I should tell him the truth, but then I nodded. "Yes. You look like a homeless person." A flicker of amusement crossed his face, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. He leaned back slightly, his gaze still fixed on me. "Can you look in the mirror for a moment?" I narrowed my eyes at him, confused by his sudden request. "Why?" I asked, my voice laced with suspicion. "Just do it," he said curtly. I gave him one last look, a bit irritated but curious, before slowly getting up and walking into my bedroom. As I stepped in front of the mirror, a low gasp escaped my lips. The reflection staring back at me was almost unrecognizable. One side of my face was swollen and my lip was split, still crusted with blood. Dirt clung to my skin, giving me a wild, disheveled appearance. I looked terrifying. "I look scarier than him?" I whispered to myself, half in disbelief. I turned on the faucet and carefully splashed water in my face, wincing as the cold water stung the bruises. The pain was sharp, but the coolness of the water offered a small comfort. I grabbed a towel and gently dabbed at the swelling, cleaning the dried blood from my lip. I reached for the ointment from the first aid kit, applying it to my lips and the more tender areas of my face. I finished and stared at my lips where there was blood, and I couldn't help but wonder why Damian hadn't reacted earlier. His expression hadn't even flickered when he saw me like this. Shouldn't vampires go wild at the sight of blood? Something about Damian was different, controlled, almost unnervingly so, but why? After cleaning off the dirt, I changed into a pair of clean, soft clothes, savoring the feeling of being less grimy. With my face now washed and the stinging ointment doing its work, I looked less like someone who had gone through hell and more like myself, even if bruised and battered. I took a deep breath, trying to shake off the last remnants of the strange encounter with Damian. When I walked back into the living room, I found him still sitting on the couch, his head leaning back against the wall, eyes closed. His large frame made the couch look comically small, as though it was built for a child, not a man, or rather not a vampire, of his size. He looked tired, drained almost. His skin seemed paler than usual, almost as if he hadn't fed in a while. Do vampires even get tired or dehydrated? Whatever it was, I didn't want to disturb him. I walked past quietly and headed into the kitchen. The tension in the air still lingered, but I could at least make myself useful while we waited for Kora. I decided to make 2 cups of coffee, figuring he could use something warm. I grabbed the cups, one for me and one for him, and brought them into the living room. I rested my own cup on the table before turning my attention to him. He was still in the same position, looking more like a statue than anything else. I hesitated for a moment, unsure how to wake him without startling him, or worse, making him angry. I cleared my throat softly, holding the cup of coffee in my hand as I considered calling his name. Just as I opened my mouth to speak, his eyes fluttered open. The glowing red of his irises made my heart stop. I stumbled back in shock, gasping. My sudden movement caused some of the hot coffee to spill onto my hand and arm. I jumped, biting back a yelp as the burning liquid scalded my skin. Damien's eyes flicked to mine instantly, his expression sharp and alert, but he didn't move, didn't speak. Just watched me carefully, the red glow fading slowly as he seemed to calm. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice softer than I expected, almost concerned. I stood there, my heart still racing from both the spill and the sight of his red eyes. Yeah, I managed to say, rubbing my arm where the coffee had burned. "Just startled, that's all." He glanced at the cup still in my hand and then back at my face. "Was that for me?" I nodded, swallowing hard and forcing a small, shaky smile. "Yeah, thought you might want some while we wait for Kora." He looked at me with a mixture of curiosity and something else I couldn't quite place. "I don't eat or drink human food," he said curtly, his tone clipped. "I appreciate the gesture, though." With that, he closed his eyes again as if dismissing both the coffee and the conversation. I stood there, feeling a mix of confusion and irritation. Why did I even think he'd want it? Still feeling the heat from the spilt coffee on my hand, I decided to take a seat across from him. I cradled the warm cup of coffee meant for him, the heat radiating through my palms. I took a long sip, the rich, bold flavor swirling in my mouth, grounding me amidst the tension crackling in the air. My heart raced, not just from the caffeine, but from the unsettling silence that enveloped us. I couldn't help but keep my gaze locked on him. He remained still, eyes closed, seemingly lost in his own world. Minutes stretched on, the silence wrapping around us like a thick fog. I finished the first cup and got the second cup. The silence was now killing me, and I couldn't take it anymore. I took a long, exaggerated sip, hoping the noise would annoy him into saying something, anything. But he remained still as if he were a statue carved from stone. "Is he dead?" I thought, glancing at him with frustration. The silence seemed to stretch on endlessly. Setting the mug down with a gentle thud, I took a deep breath, gathering my courage. "Can we talk? I have some questions." My voice wavered slightly, but I pushed through, desperate for a conversation. His response was immediate, his voice low and devoid of any emotion. "No." I felt a flicker of frustration ripple through me at his refusal, but I pushed it down, steeling myself. "Why didn't the mark protect me from those thugs?" I asked, my voice firmer than before, refusing to let his dismissal silence me. "It shielded me when I was at the Moonrise Pack, and if it came back, it should have done the same. Isn't that the point of you planting it on me in the first place? To protect me? So why didn't it work? It's back now, plastered on my skin again." Damien opened his eyes, his red irises a stark contrast to the paleness of his face. Slowly, he sat upright, his gaze locking onto mine with an intensity that made my breath hitch. "As I told you in the woods, the dark magic was too strong," he said, his tone calm, but carrying a weight that sent a shiver down my spine. "It tampered with its power. Next time, don't start trouble because it won't work." I blinked, taken aback. "Dark magic?" "Yes, you told me about the dark magic and all that stuff, but still I don't get it." My thoughts drifted to the man in the truck with glowing eyes. "Do you mean the man in the truck? The one with the glowing eyes?" I asked cautiously, remembering how surreal the whole encounter had felt. Damien nodded, his expression growing darker. "That was not a physical person. It was all dark magic meant to kill you right there and then," he explained, his words slow, deliberate. "And if you had died, it would have looked like you died of a heart attack. Quick, clean, no suspicion." I stared at him, my mind reeling. There was no trace of humor or exaggeration in his face. Every word he spoke carried a deadly seriousness that unnerved me. "How did you know all that?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Were you watching everything?" Damien's lips curved into a tight, humorless smile. "I don't need to be watching you to know you're surrounded by magic," he replied, his voice low. The implication that he always knew more than he let on sent a cold thrill through me. I opened my mouth, ready to press him for more answers, but before the words could leave my lips, the front door swung open. Kora stepped into the room, her hand tightly clasped in Ethan's. I blinked, caught off guard by the sight of them together. I hadn't expected Kora to bring Ethan, especially not after everything that had happened between them. Damian stood up from the couch, his expression unreadable as he started toward Ethan. Instinctively, I reached out, grabbing Damian's arm. "Wait," I said softly, holding him back. My attention shifted to Kora. "So, does this mean you're going to move back in with him? To his house with the twins?" Kora's lips curved into a slight, bittersweet smile as she took my hand in hers. "Yes," she admitted with a nod. "I'm sorry, girlfriend. Not just me, but the kids, too. They want their dad so badly. They want to live with him." I swallowed hard, my heart tightening. "But I thought you were set on raising them on your own." "I was," she sighed, her voice tinged with regret. "But when Zoe told me she was being bullied for not having a dad, it haunted me. I couldn't get it out of my mind. Since then, It's okay, Kora," I interrupted gently, squeezing her hand. "I understand, really. All I want is for you and the kids to be happy." Kora gave me a grateful smile, her eyes misting over. I offered her a reassuring nod before turning back to Damian. "You can continue," I said. Without hesitation, Damian stepped toward Ethan and tilted his chin up, forcing him to meet his gaze. There was a brief, tense silence as Damian stared into Ethan's confused eyes in silence for a long, tense moment. Then, in an instant, Ethan's body crumpled to the floor like a marionette with its strings cut, his body colliding with Kora, who had been standing over him. The unexpected impact sent her stumbling backwards, and in her attempt to regain balance, her arm struck the coffee table, sending the mug flying. It shattered upon hitting the ground, and before Kora could steady herself, she fell onto the broken pieces. "Kora!" I gasped, rushing to her side. I grabbed her by the arm and helped her to her feet. She winced, and I glanced down, my heart skipping a beat when I saw blood on her hand. It wasn't much, just a small cut, likely from the shards of the broken mug, but it was enough. Before I could say anything, a low, guttural sound echoed from behind me. The sound sent a chill crawling up my spine. I turned, my breath catching in my throat at the sight. Damian's entire demeanor had changed. His once calm, brooding features twisted into something terrifying. His eyes blazed a deep, menacing red, far more intense than before. His lips curled back, revealing his sharp fangs, gleaming under the dim light. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at Kora. I followed his gaze, my heart pounding. Blood. The scent must have reached him the moment Kora's hand was cut. I could feel the air around us grow thick, Damian's predatory instincts kicking in, and all I could think of was how to stop what was about to happen. Damian's eyes locked on Kora's small wound, his body coiling as though preparing to strike. My mind raced, but before I could react, Damian moved. In a blur of motion, he lunged toward Kora, fangs bared, his eyes wild and filled with hunger. I barely had time to think. One moment, Damian was still. The next, he was a blur of motion, his eyes wild and locked on Kora like a predator cornering its prey. Without a second thought, I moved, my body acting on pure instinct faster than I thought possible. Before I even realized it, I had thrown myself in front of Kora, shielding her from Damian's imminent attack. The instant I put myself between them, I felt it, sharp, excruciating pain tearing through my neck as Damian's fangs sank deep into my skin. The pain was like fire, white-hot and searing, ripping through my nerves. I gasped, the shock of it taking the air from my lungs as I stumbled forward against him. His grip tightened, his arms suddenly around me, pulling me closer as his fangs dug deeper, the raw hunger driving him. "Damian!" I choked out, my voice strained and barely a whisper. For a moment, it was as though he didn't hear me. His need, his hunger was too strong, too primal for words to reach him. The room spun, the edges of my vision blurring as the blood drained from my body, and yet I held on, refusing to give in to the overwhelming darkness creeping into my mind. With what little strength I had left, I reached up and grabbed Damian's arm, squeezing it as tightly as I could. "Damian!" I cried out again, this time louder, my voice desperate, pleading. "Damian!" My voice cracked, but this time it seemed to reach him. His movement slowed, and I felt his fangs withdraw from my neck with an agonizing pull. I collapsed against him, barely able to stand as he shifted me in his arms. For a heartbeat, he didn't move, didn't say a word. Then, slowly, he tilted his head and looked down at me. His face, twisted, monstrous, his eyes wild and unrecognizable. His pupils were dilated. Blood smeared his lips, the crimson stark against his pale skin. His expression flickered, eyes twitching as if battling against the darkness that consumed him. For a long moment, he didn't speak. He just stared, his gaze piercing through me as though trying to anchor himself in reality. His gaze locked onto me for a moment, as if recognizing me through the haze of his bloodlust. Then his hand moved, reaching behind me into Kora, fixing his eyes on her for what reasons I could not tell. My body was so numb against his hold to turn and see what he was doing, my friend. He then tightened his grip around me, his other arm wrapping around me, and before I knew it, we were in the air. I felt the world tilt as he launched me effortlessly, my body collapsing into his chest. My vision blurred, the pain in my neck throbbing with every heartbeat, and just as I tried to grasp what was happening, everything shifted. The world around me dissolved into darkness, and when I opened my eyes again, I was no longer in the room with Damien and Kora. I was in a tunnel. No, not a tunnel. It was the same dark, narrow room, the walls painted in a deep, unsettling red. A suffocating chill crept up my spine as I stood there, paralyzed with dread. I knew this place. I saw it in my dream. My hands trembled at my sides, and I fought the urge to touch the walls, knowing all too well what would happen if I did. The last time I had, the paint had turned to blood and pooled at my feet. I took a step back, my heart pounding in my chest, but before I could go any further, I hit something solid. I froze, my breath caught in my throat as a cold shiver ran through me. Slowly, I turned around, my eyes wide with fear. Standing behind me was a dark, faceless figure. Its body was shrouded in shadows, a wooden stake jutted from its chest, impaled deep, blood oozing around the wound in thick rivulets. The sight of it sent a wave of terror crashing over me, and I stumbled back, my hands trembling uncontrollably. Then, the figure spoke, a male's voice, low and haunting. "Run!" I barely had time to process the word before the figure's dark, ghostly hands reached out. Before I could react, they slammed into my chest, sending me flying backward. I collided with the wall and collapsed onto the cold, hard floor. Gasping for breath, I tried to sit up, but my eyes were drawn upward. Blood. A torrent of blood poured from above, cascading down like rain, drenching me in its warmth. My scream caught in my throat as the blood got into my mouth, warm and thick. I jolted awake, choking and gagging, my hands clawing at my throat as if to rid myself of the blood I had swallowed. But nothing came. No blood, no relief. My hands clutched at my chest as I wheezed, heart hammering, the terror from the dream still pulsing through me. I sat up abruptly, my mind racing as I realized I had been dreaming again. The room was quiet, too quiet, and I was alone. Blinking away the remnants of panic, I looked down, finding myself seated in an old-fashioned wooden bed. There was no mattress, just a hard, bare frame beneath me. The room matched the bed, aged, worn, and rustic. Everything looked like it had been preserved from another time. I reached a trembling hand to my neck, where Damien's teeth had sunk into my skin. I braced myself for the sharp, agonizing pain. But when my fingers brushed over the spot, all I felt was a strange, tingling sensation. A sting, yes, but not unpleasant. It was energizing. It was more like an electric jolt, a sensation that sent shivers through my body. I frowned, confused. I felt more alive than I had in a long time. My limbs weren't heavy with exhaustion or pain. There was no lingering soreness or fatigue, only an odd surge of vitality pulsing through my veins. Still dazed, I swung my legs over the edge of the bed and stood, my feet meeting the cool, worn wooden floor. It felt strange, this newfound strength, as if the weakness had been sucked out of me and replaced with something far more potent. Could this be a dream again? Am I in the middle of another dream? Cautiously, I made my way toward the door at the far side of the room, curious to explore what else this strange dream might have in store for me. But just as I reached for the handle, the door flew open with a violent force, slamming into me and sending me crashing to the ground. I landed hard on my backside, a sharp pain shooting up my spine. "Ow," I whimpered, instinctively rubbing my bruised tailbone. Wait, pain? Real pain. My heart skipped a beat as the realization hit me. This isn't a dream. I looked up, startled, and standing in the doorway was a young girl, no older than 16 or 17. Her wide, panicked eyes met mine as she hurried toward me, her hands outstretched in apology. "Oh no, I'm so sorry," she exclaimed, bending down to help me up. Her hands were gentle but firm as she pulled me to my feet. "I didn't mean to. Are you okay?" I blinked, trying to shake off the disorientation from being knocked over. Yeah, I'm fine," I stammered, still trying to process the girl's sudden appearance. Her expression was one of genuine concern, her blonde hair falling in soft waves around her face. "I didn't think anyone was behind the door," she apologized again, her voice soft and hurried. "I didn't mean to slam it like that." She stepped back, looking me over as though making sure I was unharmed. I nodded, still bewildered by everything happening. "It's okay. Really." I rubbed my aching back as I stood, still trying to make sense of my surroundings. My mind was spinning, pieces of the puzzle scattered and incomplete. I turned to the girl, my throat dry as I tried to ask the most pressing question burning in my mind. "Damian," I murmured, my voice shaky. "Where is he? How did I end up here?" The girl gave me a soft, almost playful smile, her dark eyes lighting up as two deep dimples appeared on her cheeks. "Damian?" she echoed, tilting her head to the side. "Are you talking about King Draven?" My brow furrowed in confusion. "No, I'm talking about Damian." I struggled to find the right words. "I mean, a very tall man with broad shoulders, dark hair. I paused, searching the girl's face for any recognition. "Have you seen him?" Her smile didn't waver as she nodded, but her next words made my stomach twist in knots. "You're talking about King Draven." I blinked, completely thrown off. "King Draven? Who the hell was that?" I took a step closer to her, trying to keep my voice steady. "No, I'm not. I'm talking about Damian. Have you seen him?" The girl tilted her head slightly, her expression still soft but now tinged with a hint of curiosity. "But you are talking about King Draven," she insisted. He's in the..." She hesitated for a moment, her gaze shifting as if she wasn't sure how much to tell me. Then she bit her lip again, her voice lowering. "He's in the tower because he's feeding. And I call him Draven because that's his name. He's the vampire king, King Damien Draven." I froze, my pulse quickening. "Feeding?" I echoed, the word sounding foreign and ominous on my lips. "Why would he..." Her gaze sharpened slightly, a warning in her voice. "You don't want vampires feeding on you here. You can't call him by his first name," she said firmly. "Not here. To everyone here, he's King Draven.